Flemish Baroque painting refers to the art produced in the southern Netherlands during Spanish control in the 16th and 17th centuries. The period roughly begins when the Dutch Republic was split from the Habsburg Spain regions to the south, with the Spanish recapturing of Antwerp in 1585, and goes until about 1700, when Habsburg authority ended with the death of King Charles II. Antwerp, home to the prominent artists Peter Paul Rubens, Anthony van Dyck, and Jacob Jordaens, was the artistic nexus, while other notable cities include Brussels and Ghent. Rubens, in particular, had a strong influence on 17th-century visual culture. His innovations helped define Antwerp as one of Europe's major artistic cities, especially for Counter-Reformation imagery, and his student Van Dyck was instrumental in establishing new directions in English portraiture. Other developments in Flemish Baroque painting are similar to those found in Dutch Golden Age painting, with artists specializing in such areas as history painting, portraiture, genre painting, landscape painting, and still life. General characteristics. Flemish, in the context of this and artistic periods such as Flemish primitives, often includes the regions not associated with modern Flanders, including the Duchy of Brabant and the autonomous Prince-Bishopric of Liege. By the 17th century, however, Antwerp was the main city for innovative artistic production, largely due to the presence of Rubens. Brussels was important as the location of the court, attracting David Teniers the Younger later in the century. Late Mannerism. Although paintings produced at the end of the 16th century belong to general Northern Mannerist and late Renaissance approaches that were common throughout Europe, artists such as Otto van Veen, Adam van Noort, Martin de Vos, and the Franken family were particularly instrumental in setting the stage for the local Baroque. Between 1585 and the early 17th century they made many new altarpieces to replace those destroyed during the iconoclastic outbreaks of 1566. Also, during this time Franz Franken the Younger and Jan Bruegel the Elder became important for the small cabinet paintings, often depicting mythological and history subjects. The Age of Rubens. Peter Paul Rubens, a student of both Otto van Veen and Adam van Noort, spent 8 years in Italy, during which time he studied examples of classical antiquity, the Italian Renaissance, and contemporaries Adam Elsheimer and Caravaggio. Following his return to Antwerp he set up an important studio, training students such as Anthony van Dyck, and generally exerting a strong influence on the direction of Flemish art. Most artists active in the city during the first half of the 17th century were directly influenced by Rubens. Specializations and collaborations. Flemish art is notable for the large amount of collaboration that took place between independent masters, which was partly related to the local tendency to specialize in a particular area. Frans Snyders, for example, was an animal painter, and Jan Bruegel the Elder was admired for his landscapes and paintings of plants. Both artists worked with Rubens, who usually painted the figures, and other artists to create collaborative pieces. Innovations. Flower still life painting, which developed around 1600 by artists such as Jan Bruegel the Elder, was partially a Flemish innovation, echoed in the Dutch Republic in the works of the Antwerp-born Ambrosius Boschert the Elder. In Antwerp, however, this new genre also developed into a specifically Catholic type of painting, the flower garland. Other types of paintings closely associated with Flemish Baroque include the monumental hunting scenes by Rubens and Snyders, and gallery paintings by artists such as Willem van Hecht and David Teniers the Younger. History painting. History painting, which includes biblical, mythological and historical subjects, was considered by 17th-century theoreticians as the most noble art. Abraham Janssens was an important history painter in Antwerp between 1600 and 1620, although after 1609 Rubens was the leading figure. Both Van Dyck and Jacob Jordaens were active painting monumental history scenes. Following Rubens's death, Jordaens became the most important Flemish painter. Other notable artists working in the idiom of Rubens include Gaspard de Creye, who was active in Brussels, artists Wolfert, Cornelis de Vos, Jan Cossiers, Theodore van Thalden, Abraham van Diepenbeek, and Jan Berghorst. During the second half of the century, history painters combined a local influence from Rubens with knowledge of classicism and Italian Baroque qualities. Artists in the vein include Erasmus Quilinus the Younger, Jan van den Hoeke, Peter van Lint, Cornelis Schutt, and Thomas Willeboorts Boschert. Later in the century, many painters turned to Antony van Dyck as a major influence. Among them were Peter Thijs, Lucas Franchoys the Younger, and artists who were also inspired by late Baroque theatricality such as Theodore Boermans and Jan Erasmus Quilinus. Additionally, a Flemish variant of Caravagism was expressed by Theodore Rombats and Gerard Segers. Religious painting. Rubens is closely associated with the development of the Baroque altarpiece, painted for the Arquebusiers Guild, the Descent from the Cross triptych, with side wings depicting the Visitation and Presentation in the Temple, and exterior panels showing Street, Christopher and the Hermit, is an important reflection of Counter-Reformation ideas about art combined with Baroque naturalism, dynamism and monumentality. Roger de Biles explains that the painter has entered so fully into the expression of his subject that the sight of this work has the power to touch a hardened soul and cause it to experience the sufferings endured by Jesus Christ in order to redeem it. Portraiture. Although not predominantly a portrait painter, Rubens's contributions include early work such as his portrait of Brigitte of Spinola Doria, paintings of his wives, and numerous portraits of friends and nobility. He also exerted a strong influence on Baroque portraiture through his student Antony van Dyck. The Van Dyck became court painter for Charles I of England and was influential on subsequent English portraiture. Other successful portraitists include Cornelis de Vos and Jacob Jordaens. Although most Flemish portraiture is life-sized or monumental, Gonzalez Cox and Gillis van Tilborch specialized in small-scale group portraiture. Genre painting. Genre paintings, or scenes of everyday life, are common in the 17th century. Many artists follow the tradition of Peter Bruegel the Elder in depicting low-life peasant themes. Although elegant high-life subjects featuring fashionably dressed couples at balls or in gardens of love are also common. Adrian Brouwer, whose small paintings often show peasants fighting and drinking, was particularly influential on subsequent artists. Images of women performing household tasks, popularized in the northern Netherlands by Pieter de Hooch and Jan Vermeer, is not a significant subject in the south, although artists such as Jan Sibierrechts explored these themes to some degree. Bruegel tradition. Flemish genre painting is strongly tied to the traditions of Peter Bruegel the Elder and was a style that continued directly into the 17th century, through copies and new compositions made by his sons Peter Bruegel the Younger and Jan Bruegel the Elder. Many of these are kermis paintings and scenes of peasants taking part in other outdoor enjoyments viewed from an elevated viewpoint. Artists in the Dutch Republic, such as the Flemish-born David Van Boons and Roland Savary, also made similar works, popularizing rustic scenes of everyday life closely associated with Dutch and Flemish painting. Adrian Brouwer and his followers. Adrian Brouwer typically painted small scenes of ragged peasants fighting, gaming, drinking and generally expressing exaggerated and rude behavior. Born in the southern Netherlands, Brouwer spent the 1620s in Amsterdam and Haarlem, where he came under the influence of Frans and Dyck and other artists working in a loose painterly manner. Upon his return to Antwerp around 1631 or 1632, he introduced a new, influential format in which the subjects were painted as interior, instead of exterior, scenes. He also painted expressive facial studies like the bitter drink, a genre called Chinese. Brouwer's art was recognized in his own lifetime and had a powerful impact on Flemish art. Rubens owned more works by him at the time of his death than any other painter, and artists such as David Teniers the Younger, Jan van der Ven, Jules van Kreesbeek and David Reichert III continued to work in a similar manner. Elegant company scenes, paintings of elegant couples in the latest fashions, often with underlying themes of love of the five senses, were commonly painted by Hieronymus Franken the Younger, Louis de Colery, Simon de Vos, David Teniers the Younger and David Reichert III. Rubens's Garden of Love belongs to these traditions. Monumental genre scenes, whereas elegant company scenes and works by Brouwer and his followers were often small in scale. Other artists looked to Caravaggio for inspiration and painted large-scale, theatrically inspired scenes in which musicians, card players, and fortune-tellers are pushed to the foreground of the composition. These paintings, like others by Caravaggio, are generally illuminated by strong lighting effects. Adam da Costa, Gerard Segers and Theodore Rombouts were the main exponents of this popular style in the early 17th century, which was popularized by Italian followers of Caravaggio like Bartolomeo Manfredi in Utrecht, Caravaggio like Gerrit van Honthorst. Rombouts was also influenced by his teacher Abraham Jensens, who began incorporating Caravaggesque influences into his history paintings from first decade of the 17th century. Jacob Jordaens. Jacob Jordaens, who became Antwerp's most important artist after Rubens's death in 1640, is well known for his monumental genre paintings of subjects such as The King Drinks and As the Old Sing, Sir Pipe the Young. Many of these paintings use compositional and lighting influence similar to those of the Caravaggio, while the treatment of the subjects inspired Dutch artists like Jan Steen. Battle scenes. Another popular type of painting invented in the Low Countries was landscapes with historical and fictional battles, as well as skirmishes and robberies. Sebastiaan Vranck and his pupil Pieter Snares specialized in this genre, and Snares' student Adam Frans van der Meulen continued painting them in Antwerp, Brussels and Paris until the end of the century. Bamboccianti and Italian classicism. Following a time-honored tradition, many northern artists traveled to Italy in the 17th century. Flemish artists such as Jan Miel and Michael Sweert settled in Rome and adopted the style of the Dutch painter Pieter van Laer. Known as the Bamboccianti, they specialized in rustic scenes of everyday life in Rome and its countryside. These paintings are inspired by the colors of the Roman Campagna and study of classical sculpture. In general, genre painting was not as accepted in Italy, especially by official organizations such as the Academy of St. Luke, so many of the painters also joined the Bentvueghels. It acted loosely as a guild, bringing together Dutch and Flemish painters with similar interests and traditions. Landscape and seascape. Early landscape painting Gillis van Koningsloo was an innovative landscape painter in Antwerp in the late 16th century, who introduced a more natural view instead of the traditional universal landscape popularized by earlier painters such as Joachim Patina. He left a strong influence on northern landscape painting in general through his period in Amsterdam and is a founding member of the Frankenthal school. Forest and mountain landscapes were painted by Abraham Govaerts, Alexander Kirin CX, Gisbrecht Latens, Tobias Verhecht and Jules de Momper. Paul Brill settled in Rome, where he specialized as a landscape painter, decorating Roman villas and creating small cabinet paintings. Rubens and later painters, Jan Wildens and Lucas van Uden, painted natural landscapes inspired by Rubens, and frequently collaborated with figure painters or animal specialists to paint the backgrounds. Rubens turned to landscape painting in the 1630s, focusing on the area around his chateau, Hetstein. A well-known example is the landscape with a view of Hetstein. Marine painting, small seascapes were another popular theme. Artists such as Bonaventura Peters painted shipwrecks and atmospheric views of ships at sea, as well as imaginary views of exotic ports. Hendrik van Minderhout, who was from Rotterdam and settled in Antwerp, continued this latter theme contemporaneous with developments of marine painting in the Dutch Republic. Architectural painting. Interior architectural views, usually of churches, developed out of the late 16th century works of Hans Van de Vries. Many were actual locations. Peter Neefsay, for example, made numerous interiors of the Cathedral of Our Lady, Antwerp. Hendrik van Steenwijck too, on the other hand, followed Vadimans' precedent in painting imaginary interiors. The genre continued in the later 17th century by Anton Goering and Wilhelm Schubert van Ehrenberg, but the Flemish examples do not demonstrate the same level of innovation found in the Dutch perspectives of Pieter Jansz Redem or Emmanuel de Witt. Gallery and art collection painting. Gallery paintings appeared in Antwerp around 1610, and developed, like architectural interiors, from the compositions of Hans Van de Vries. One of the earliest innovators of this new genre was Frans Franken the Younger, who introduced the type of work known as the Preciosenwon. In these, prints, paintings, sculptures, drawings, as well as collectible objects from the natural world like shells and flowers are collected together in the foreground against a wall that imitates encyclopedic cabinets of curiosities. A similar variation of these collections of artistic wealth of the series of the Five Senses created by Jan Bruegel the Elder and Rubens. Willem van Hecht developed another variation in which illustrations of actual artworks are displayed in a fantasy art gallery, while connoisseurs in art lovers admire them. Later in the century, David Teniers the Younger, working in the capacity of court painter to Archduke Leopold Wilhelm of Austria, documented the Archduke's collection of Italian paintings in Brussels as gallery painters as well as in a printed catalogue, the Theatrum Pictorium. Flemish gallery and art collection paintings have been interpreted as a kind of visual theory of art. Such paintings continue to be made in Antwerp by Gerard Thomas and Balthasar van den Bossche, and foreshadow the development of the Vedute in Italy and the galleries of Giovanni Paolo Panini. Still life and animal painting. Flower painting. Jan Bruegel the Elder was one of the important innovators of the floral still life around 1600. These paintings, which presented immaculately observed arrangements and compositions, were imaginary creations of flowers that bloom at different times of the years. They were popular with leading patrons and nobility across Europe, and generally have an underlying vanitas motif. The compositions of Bruegel's paintings were also influential on later Dutch flower pieces. Bruegel's sons Jan Bruegel the Younger Pieter and Ambrosius Bruegel were also flower specialists. Ossius Beer was another flower painter at the beginning of the 17th century. His paintings share many similarities with northern contemporaries such as Ambrosius Boschert the Elder. Garland painting, closely related to the flower still life, is the flower garland genre of painting that was invented by Jan Bruegel in collaboration with Cardinal Federico Borromeo in Milan. The early versions of these paintings, such as the collaboration by Breffel and Rubens in Munich, show the Virgin Mary and Christ Child surrounded by a garland of flowers. They have been interpreted as distinctly counter-Reformation images, with the flowers emphasizing the delicacy of the Virgin and Child, images of which were destroyed in large numbers during the iconoclastic outbreaks of 1566. Bruegel's student, the Jesuit painter Daniel Segers, also painted many of these types of works for an international clientele. In later versions, the fleshy Madonna and Child gave way to sculptural niches and even pagan themes. Breakfast and Banquet still life. The Ontbijtje, or Little Breakfast, is a type of still life that was popular in both the northern and southern Netherlands, showing a variety of eating and drinking vessels and foods, such as cheese and bread, against a neutral background. Ossius Beer, Clara Peters, Cornelis Mahu and Jacob Foppens van Es were all artists who made these types of painting. More elaborate of the pronk, or sumptuous, still life. This style developed in the Dutch Republic, and was brought to Antwerp by Jan Davids de Heem. They show, on a larger scale than earlier works, complex compositions of expensive items, rare foods, and fleshy, appealing fruit. These paintings are related to vanitas and transience motifs. Animal still life. Franz Snyders painted large still lifes focusing on dead game and animals. His compositions, along with those of his follower Adrian van Utrecht, look back to the 16th century paintings of Peter Aertsen and Joachim Beukelare, but instill that tradition with a high Baroque monumentality. Subsequent artists Jan F. Whitey and Peter Boel further elaborated on this type by including a noticeable mixture of living animals and dead game. These latter paintings are closely related to images of the hunt, which came into fashion in Flemish painting during the 17th century. Hunting scenes. Rubens introduced the monumental hunt of Flemish art, depicting on a large scale a close battle inspired by his study of classical antiquity and Leonardo da Vinci's Battle of Anghiari. These works show both noble hunts, such as the wolf and fox hunt, and exotic hunts, such as the lion hunt. Franz Snyders and Paul de Vos created similarly large paintings which are distinct from Rubens's works in the focus on the animals and absence of human participation. Cabinet painting. Small, intricate paintings, usually depicting history and biblical subjects, were produced in great numbers in the southern Netherlands throughout the 17th century. Many were created by anonymous artists, however artists such as Jan Bruegel the Elder, Hendrik van Bellen, Frans Franken the Younger and Hendrik de Klerk were all successful cabinet painters during the first half of the 17th century. These artists, as well as followers of Adam Elsheimer like David Teniers the Elder, remained partly shaped by continued Mannerist stylistic tendencies. However, Rubens influenced a number of later artists who incorporated his Baroque style into the small context of these works. Among them are Frans Wouters, Jan Thomas van Ieperin, Simon de Vos, Peter van Lint, and Willem van Herp. These small paintings were traded widely throughout Europe, and by way of Spain to Latin America.